50 years ago, Brazil and China established diplomatic ties. We'll discuss the political and economic relationship the two countries share today. Hello, I'm Mike Walter, filling in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. 50 years after establishing diplomatic relations, China is now Brazil's top trading partner. In 2023, bilateral trade between the two countries exceeded 157 billion US dollars. There are currently more than 300 Chinese companies operating in Brazil, spanning electricity, infrastructure, and electric vehicles. CGTN's Paulo Cabral takes a closer look.
In recent months, electric vehicles have become the most visible symbol of Chinese products in Brazil, with car manufacturers investing significantly to establish their presence in the Brazilian market. Chinese electric car maker BYD, the leading seller of EVs in the country, is planning to build a factory here. However, BYD's relationship with Brazil dates back to 2017, when they started producing solar panels at a plant in the São Paulo countryside.
So it's a huge market, even for bus, trucks, now solar panels, and also the automotive sector. And now we are seeing that everything is growing, and Brazil, it's one of the most important markets for BYD worldwide.
Besides the consumer products, there is also heavy investment from Chinese companies in Brazil's infrastructure. Energy is among the highlights, with growing participation in generation assets and also in transmission lines badly needed to carry power across the country.
From 2010 to 2022, investment from Chinese companies, state-owned enterprises, small and medium enterprise, has entailed around $70 billion. So China has become the largest trade partner and the largest investment in Brazil.
When it comes to exports, agriculture is the top sector for Chinese investment, with big purchases of products such as beef, corn, and above all, soybeans.
China is Brazil's main customer for agricultural commodities. However, exports are highly concentrated in just a handful of products.
This officer from Brazil's Farming Confederation, CNA, says producers in the country are working to expand the range of products offered to China. In recent years, fruit consumption has increased among Chinese consumers. CNA sees potential in further expanding fruits and nuts exports.
We want to do business with China. We want to maintain this partnership at this moment when diplomatic relations are completing 50 years. We want to keep this for the long term. We want this partnership to be increasingly enduring because it is a market full of opportunities for Brazilian products.
The governments of Brazil and China have already made it clear that both sides are interested in deepening commercial ties and businesses to further strengthen bilateral trade and investments in the future. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, Lusiânia, Brazil.
For more on Brazil-China relations, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Beijing is Zhang Xishuang. He is a professor and director of the Center for Latin American Studies at Shanghai University. From Rio de Janeiro, Evandro Carvalho is a professor of international law and head of the Center for Brazil-China Studies at GVF. And also with us from Sao Paulo, Gustavo Ribeiro is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Brazilian Report. Also joining us, Victor Gao. He's the chair professor at Soochow University in Beijing. And Victor, why don't I start with you? 50 years, that's a lengthy period of time. We see the establishment of a embassy in Brasilia, another in Beijing. It was August 15th, 1974. The beginning of a long relationship. We just heard in Paulo's story has just kind of developed and developed. Give us your sense of where we are and kind of trace us through these 50 years, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, please allow me to congratulate China and Brazil for the 50-year anniversary on the normalization of relations between these two very important countries. Secondly, we are all very proud of such huge achievements between these two countries. And allow me to emphasize that in China, I would be surprised if anyone in China is not a fan of Brazil, because we watch the football games, and the Brazilian team always dazzle the whole world, including the Chinese audience. Thirdly, the Chinese economy and the Brazilian economy, as they turned out, are highly complementary to each other. And the market is huge in China for many products from Brazil. This is very logical because Chinese population is 1.4 billion. And, for example, the size of the Chinese economy is as big as 5 India. So you can imagine the great potential in the demand in China for the Brazilian products. Fourthly, the Chinese economy and the Brazilian economy can really help each other. For example, China has turned out to be a leader in many high-tech products, including, as you mentioned just now, in the EV. And China is really the main builder of infrastructure of all kinds. And China is very happy and very willing to cooperate with Brazil for many connectivity projects, which can help increase the productivity in Brazil for many years and decades to come. So I'm not only very happy to see China-Brazilian achievements for the past 50 years, but I'm very confident about the next coming 50 years and beyond, because these two countries, these two economies, and these two people have all the reason to further enhance their cooperation and solidarity for mutual benefit.
Well, Victor, we've got some serious commentators here with serious expressions on their face, but when you mentioned the football team, I saw broad smiles on our friends from Brazil, Evandro being one of them. Talk to me about this relationship. I've got a couple of questions for you, but first let's start with Paulo's report, because I thought it was interesting talking about BYD, how this relationship with BYD is kind of developed over time. And that's what we've seen with this relationship between China and Brazil. It just continues to grow in a lot of different ways, doesn't it?
Thank you very much for having me here, and together with several friends here. Of course, the bilateral relations between Brazil and China is very promising, and the EV car is one of them. And BYD now became a new company here, and the Brazilians are, starting to discover this possibility to have their electric cars here in Brazil. But of course, the bilateral relations has huge potential in several other areas, not only in trade and economic cooperation that we saw here, that Brazil and China is very, very complementary, and especially because it's based in commodities. Brazil is the largest soybean producers, and China is the biggest buyer, for example. And also we can mention, for example, in terms of infrastructure development and investment, as we saw in the video, China has been a significant investor in Brazil in energy, transportation, telecommunications. But mainly I'd like to highlight here the environmental and the climate change cooperation. Brazil has a vast natural resources, global importance, and this dialogue and cooperation between Brazil and China can be very fruitful for the future.
Let me ask a follow-up. We know that President Lula was there for a state visit last year, met with President Xi Jinping, and then I believe it was back in an interview with foreign journalists in July, the Brazilian president also kind of mapped out where he sees this relationship going in the future. Let's listen to what he had to say, and I want to get your reaction on the other side.
We are planning to discuss with China a new strategic partnership between Brazil and China, a partnership that goes beyond future trading, a partnership that includes science and technology, chip production, software, and other aspects. In other words, what we really want is to establish a strategic partnership that can continuously lift the ties between Brazil and China towards more prosperity and create jobs in China and Brazil.
Sounds like a good plan. Where do you see efforts strengthening moving forward?
And this is an important topic, this collaboration in technology, especially in 5G, artificial intelligence, and energy. These are sectors increasingly important. And I believe that Brazil and China must strengthen the dialogue, especially between the researchers, the scientists in this area. And Brazil has a task to do internally. The Brazilian government should, and I hope Lula can do this, invest more in science and innovation. And China became is leading a lot of areas in technology and innovation. And I think Brazil can take advantage of this to establish a dialogue that can, a cooperation that can be a kind of a win-win cooperation.
Zhang Xishui, to that point, there's been this comment that China and Brazil working from soybeans to space. On the science front, 6 satellites have been jointly developed under the China-Brazil Earth Resources Satellite Program. So do you see that also as an area moving forward where these two can strengthen their relationship?
Oh, yes. I believe that there are so many areas which China and Brazil can further move forward. Well, we often say China-Brazil cooperation, high in the sky and down in the sea. I hope that in the near future, these two countries will further promote their bilateral relationship in the high tech, as my colleagues mentioned just now. One big area I have in mind is the so-called EV and many other high-tech telecommunication. Well, China always hopes that we can play an important role in promoting so-called telecommunication and other areas in the so-called infrastructure sector. But well, in order to achieve this kind of objective, I think people in Brazil need to have a new mindset in terms of everything. As far as I know, some people in Brazil say that China-Brazil cooperation should go beyond complementarity. Well, I don't agree with this kind of judgment. In the age of globalization, in order to promote bilateral relationship, particularly in the trade and investment, you cannot go beyond the complementarity because complementarity can play a very important role in making good advantage of the so-called comparative advantage. So I hope that the people in Brazil will put forward new ideas of how to improve your investment environment. And of course, Chinese companies should learn more about the basic conditions of the market in Brazil. So anyway, I believe that the future is very bright. And if we can also should mention the so-called people-to-people exchanges, because mutual understanding between the two sides needs to be further strengthened.
And Gustavo, the Brazilian vice president, was also in Beijing not too long ago, I think just a few months back. And during that visit, he also met with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And at the time, he called the visit a chance to look ahead to the next 50 years of this relationship. I'm not going to ask you to go 50 years forward, but where do you see it in the next few years kind of developing and moving in a complementary fashion?
Well, I think beyond the economic aspects that my fellow panelists have talked about, I think one aspect that is important to analyze when we're talking about Brazil-China relations is the fact that Brazil, and that is particularly the case under the Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva administration, sees China as a very strategic partner in terms of the role that Brazil wants to play in the world. Lula believes that the world is getting more and more multipolar, and that it is interesting for Brazil not to be totally aligned either with the US or the European Union, and that it should have positive relations with China, with Russia. So, for instance, China supports Brazil's demands for more of a say in forum fora such as the UN or economic fora. The BRICS alliance is also one of the linchpins of the Lula diplomacy. So I think that this diplomatic ties between the two sides beyond the obvious economic ties, it's something that we should pay attention to. And if I may, just to give some detail, we talked about BYD in Brazil, and I think it's important to say that if you live in Rio or in São Paulo, it is visible how BYD models are getting more and more popular on Brazilian streets. And I mean, we at the Brazilian Report did a story very recently about how China has become the biggest supplier of vehicles imported into Brazil. And the case of BYD is quite interesting because it went from single digit, the number of models sold in Brazil went from the single digits in 2019 to 75% of all imported licensed vehicles in Brazil in the first half of this year. So, and also Brazil is the country that buys the most Chinese EVs. So that's just a piece of data that I wanted to tell.
No, that's very impressive. Gustavo, also the Brazilian mining giant Vale has had a commercial relationship with China dating back, even predating these diplomatic relations, going back to 1973. They exported about 186 million metric tons of iron ore to China in 2023. And in an exclusive interview with us, the executive vice president talked about his optimism for this relationship. I want to play that, and then I want to get your reaction on the other side.
The Brazilian culture has a connection with development, with looking at the future, very optimistic view of the future. I see that the Chinese have the same, and the Chinese can teach us very much about planning, about technology. The urban development in China is an example, a reference to the world, how the Chinese have been able to develop their cities without destroying the cultural heritage. So there are many examples of how Brazil wants to achieve the same goals that China has.
You know, we've talked about BYD. You talked about just this growth, this explosion that we've seen. We're talking about that relationship, which dates back to 1973. Brazil, also the world's largest coffee producer. It's exporting quite a bit to China. So talk to us about trade and how important this partnership is between China and Brazil.
Well, I mean, China is Brazil's most important trading partner. It gobbles up about a third of all Brazilian exports. And when we talk just about commodities, it goes to more than half, depending on the month we're talking about. Some see an issue that Brazilian exports to China are very much concentrated in three products: agricultural commodities such as soybeans, iron ore, and oil. And that Brazil struggles to manage to sell a more diverse portfolio of products. Now, that being said, we used to say in Brazil in the 90s that if the US sneezed, Brazil would catch pneumonia. I think that is now the case with China. China has become the most important trading partner for Brazil. Several industries depend in an oversized way of China. So any hiccups with the Chinese economy can be very damaging to industries such as mining, such as oil, and especially agricultural products. For instance, the pork industry has in China their biggest client, but also the meat sector. So, I mean, nowadays we can say if China sneezes, then would catch pneumonia in Brazil.
Well, let's hope we keep the hankies close by and there are no sneezes. Victor, let's talk about Brazil and China because they also have this linkage. Founding members of BRICS, and it started small, as we know, just a few countries. Now it's grown, it ballooned recently, adding, we've got Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. Now it accounts for about 28% of the global economy, produces about 44% of the world's crude oil. So it's really grown. This year, the summit will be in Russia. What do you think is going to be on the top of the agenda this year for BRICS?
I think BRICS is already more than 10 years old, and the membership has increased from 5 to 10 member states. And allow me to just mention one point. BRICS start with B, which is Brazil. So you can see that this BRICS framework, as well as Brazil as an important member of BRICS, are truly very profound. And it is expected that the membership of BRICS will further increase from currently 10 member states to, let's say, 15, 20, 25, and beyond. There are many countries interested in applying to become full members of BRICS. And I think this is one of the main important topic that will be discussed by the BRICS summit in Russia this year. I'm going to Moscow in September to attend one of the economic meetings related to the BRICS summit. And I'm very much looking forward to meeting with other participants from other member states, for example. And I think how to really think in the longer term for the BRICS development in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, and beyond will be very important, because BRICS is a framework based on consensus, based on peaceful and respectful relations between and among members, and also with any other aspiring countries want to become members. And I think the BRICS should also focus on how to escalate and further increase our level of cooperation from trading, which we talked about a lot, financial cooperation, technological cooperation, and AI, and also how to and whether and when it will be very important to boost the financial cooperation, including, as President Lula of Brazil has mentioned on many occasions, a kind of BRICS currency or currency cooperation within the BRICS framework. Now, another thing, allow me to emphasize, if you look at the membership of BRICS, there is a high emphasis on energy. Many of the BRICS member states are rich in energy resources, and for China, it not only produces oil and gas, but it also uses more oil and more gas which need to be imported. So this facilitates the cooperation between and among BRICS member states. And, for example, whether BRICS members can come up with a new way to promote energy cooperation, because you have the energy exporting countries within BRICS and energy importing countries like China and India, for example, within BRICS. So I think there will be a lot of topics to be discussed, and there will be no limitation as to how the imagination of BRICS member states can apply to the future cooperation in the coming years and coming decades.
And Gustavo, I know you mentioned BRICS earlier as well. What about that, entering into BRICS, what did it do in terms of strengthening the relationship between these two countries?
Well, it has done wonders because, for instance, the BRICS Bank is one of the big financiers of infrastructure projects in Brazil. And I mean, China is one of the key countries in terms of foreign direct investment. For instance, Brazil in 2021 gobbled up about 13% of Chinese capital invested in the world last year. Now, there are Brazilian diplomats that were not very fond of the recent BRICS expansion because they believe that these new countries entered BRICS because they want closer relations with China, but not necessarily with Brazil, and that having more countries would dilute Brazil's influence in the group.
Interesting. Well, Evandro, in an interview with Xinhua News Agency, President Lula said he's going to participate as a guest at the APEC meetings in November in Lima, Peru. And at the time, there is a belief that Brazil may officially join the Belt and Road Initiative. Certainly, Brazil has benefited from infrastructure projects with China. How would the BRI impact Brazil moving forward?
This is a very good question, because until now, Brazil is not participating in the Belt and Road Initiative, despite the fact that China is the largest trading partner to Brazil and an important investor, as we know. And there is a huge expectation about the next meeting between President Lula and President Xi Jinping in this APEC, and also in Brazil because of the G20. if Lula, actually Lula recently, he did a declaration telling that he would like to talk with the Chinese side about the Belt and Road Initiative and how Brazil can join and also be a very active part in this initiative. Is a very interesting declaration. So President Lula is open to discuss how Brazil can join the Belt and Road Initiative. And of course, this can open a new chapter in the bilateral relations. There is a huge expectation, and we know that in Peru there is the Chancay port, and a strategic port that can also give the open a way to Brazilian products through Pacific Ocean, and also, when we think about Belt and Road Initiative, we need to consider that when China invests in South America, China consider, all the region when they choose its investments in the region. And Brazil is a big country in South America, and Brazilian cannot discuss bilateral relations without taking into account the fact that Brazil also has an interest in South America, and China is a key actor in the region as well. So both countries can strengthen the dialogue and be a good partner to improve the economy in the region.
All right, Zhang Xishui, last question for you. Of course, after that, we've got the G20 coming up. That'll be in Rio in November. And President Lula has proposed creating a global alliance against hunger and poverty. Of course, China has this great record as far as alleviating extreme poverty. Are there lessons to be learned from China?
Well, I think China has done a very good job in dealing with the poverty issue. Well, I think Brazil can learn something from China. But well, there are two points I wish to point out. First of all, both Brazil and China have their own different conditions. So sometimes it's not easy for Brazil to model on China. Secondly, I think the most promising area for cooperation for the two countries in this area is to have more economic cooperation. Well, China can offer more loans, more financial aid to Brazil. So this is a very promising area. So I believe that in the near future, both countries can work together.
That's a really good point. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all for joining us. Great discussion. That's all the time we have. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.